You've been everybody else's first project, but when are you going to start being your own? I'm NeshaDanay, and this is I Am My First Project, where we have real and uncomfortable conversations about why you're constantly staying stuck. As a resilience coach, I'm here to show you that most people prefer to be stuck in familiar bondage than unstuck in unfamiliar growth. And if that triggers you, keep watching. So if you're tired of staying stuck, I have a 4-week program that's opening up in January 2026. You get to work with me and we get to build the life that you want to build. Click the link below and let's get to getting unstuck. Hey y'all, hey, it's episode 2. I got flashcards, y'all, like we got official today. And I'm just so glad that y'all are back at episode 2 of I Am My First Project. And yeah, we're just gonna hop in straight into it. So, all right. So by the age of 14 or 16, I had already been in 2 cult churches. The first one started essentially when I was about 10 years old. This was an interesting experience because churches are going to teach me a lot as I age. Churches are going to also shape the fundamentals of my life because they were introduced to me at such a young age. I can't really talk too much about everything because I'll jump into it too quick, but we're going to stick to the notes because, as y'all know, I am a certified yapper. All right, so today we're talking about religious trauma. And we're not talking about it in the sense of I'm anti-God because God is the author. I always talk about it. I am the co-author, but God is the ultimate author in my life. We are going to talk about the toxic cycles in church, in religion, the ones that aren't shaped out of love and who God is of the Bible, the ones that are shaped out of scary predicaments, and the ones that are used to manipulate and control us. This episode is for women who have been controlled, manipulated, or abused by the church, who have experienced people that have used everything in the name of God to dictate who they are and who they could be. This is for the people who experienced that conversation that left them a little uneasy, but because God said it, or because the leader said it, or a pastor said it, it seemed like it was acceptable. This is for women who were left feeling guilty. Guilty for not always having it right, left feeling guilty for leaving the church, or left feeling guilty because they didn't do it the right way. The way that everybody else deemed that they should or should be socially appropriate for a Christian woman. And most importantly, this is for people who have allowed religion to control their marriage, their family dynamics, their friends, and any other area of their life where they felt like they were limited and had no power in the say of what they did with their community. So we're going to talk about the first church, the first experience of a cult church, and that started at age 10 for me, after my dad got saved. So let me tell you the story. So we're going to get into this get nice and comfy, because this one gets a little crazy when you have to remember the context that I was just 10. Small church, 10 or 15 people. My dad is sick. I'm 10. He's dying, or so I think he's dying. I get him for about 7 more years. I am severely depressed, severely sad, severely upset, and angry at the world because I can't see my father. My mom is drowning in debt, emotionally unavailable and trying to stay above water herself. I have an older brother who's very distant and cold, has not much to say to me. And again, we talked about my childhood. I had friends. I just didn't quite fit in. I was a minority. And they couldn't relate 100% to who I was, nor did I ever feel like I truly belonged in that community. So I had a very dark perspective. Track was my only escape at the time, and being alone and in isolation. So we're going to get into this church living room conversation where I'm sitting there, 10 years old, 3 adults around me, and I am literally being questioned about how could I be so selfish and why am I making my parents' life harder? Like, just pause for a moment. How am I making my parents' life harder because I don't want to be here anymore? Because I have nobody. And that's when I realized this wasn't a good experience. And this experience was going to leave me feeling completely empty, completely shameful, guilty and remorsed and upset and angry and frustrated. Because how dare you say that I don't love God, I'm selfish, and I don't care about my parents when nobody was looking at me. Nobody even asked me if I was safe. Nobody asked me if I was okay. It was just shame and guilt. What this taught me is your pain is an inconvenience to others. Wanting to live or die didn't matter. Your duty is not to burden people with your problems. If you're struggling, you're weak, figure it out. Depression equals spiritual failure. You have to be perfect or have no problems. And God doesn't really care about your pain. He cares about your obedience. He cares about you being acceptable to what society feels like is a normal habit. Deal with it. How this ends up shaping me is religion is going to control everything. And if you're sitting here on this other side of the screen thinking, man, I can relate to this story, maybe not in the full context, but in the fact of religion does control everything. And I mean all aspects of your life. You can't even make a decision without religion. This story might hit you a little bit more because you will understand that sometimes we don't get to see that we're not even co-authoring alongside God. We're co-authoring around a version of religion that was presented to us and told for us to accept, but we never seeked relationship ourselves. I also think this shaped me because being good and perfect became my identity. I went into full perfectionism. I felt like everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't perfect, then I wasn't good enough for God. I wasn't good enough for people, and I couldn't earn anything from anybody. So obedience, malicious obedience, religious obedience became the norm for me. And it trickled into so many other areas of my life. I also learned that everything was centered around marriage when it came to religious and relationships. Everybody had to be my husband. This has to be the one. And that's unrealistic. Have y'all met society? Okay. Doing all the routine work. I mean, perform. I was in the American rat race before I even knew what the American rat race was. I was performing for my parents, performing for the church, performing for myself, and performing even for my brother to talk to me. What could I do to get these people in this house to see me? Do I have to act out? Do I have to be suicidal? Do I have to be angry? Do I have to be in isolation? What is going to get me seen? Heavy hitters. But that takes us to the second cult church. This one is going to be a little bit after my parents' divorce. We kind of skip in time. But this one is going to set the precedents of so many of the last 5 years of my life. Talked about the marriage that began and ended in 90 days and stayed in for 4 years. So let's get into it. So 14-year-old me goes to church with my mom. We're super excited that we're going to be finding a new community. I'm excited because I miss church. We hadn't been in one a little bit. We were church hopping, and I still did enjoy church. I might talk about these churches as cults now, but at the time I did not know that they were cults. It was after self-reflection and years of healing that I realized that I was in a religious trauma cycle. This church seemed to be so different because there was this amazing first lady, and I just thought everything was going to be great here. It was going to be different. They were so welcoming and so loving. It was a small church as well. They were family oriented. They were all related. And the first lady took a liking to me. A very good liking to me, so I thought. At first, it felt like love. It felt like mentorship, like someone really finally cared. And I mean, for somebody who hadn't been seen for so long, she finally seen me. And that was just amazing for somebody who was looking for attention and thirsting for it in a sense. This love didn't hurt like the others. This love didn't look like it took advantage. This love didn't look like it was going to take advantage of an angry, mad teenager. But her love was going to actually end up being very controlling, very manipulating, and very, very detrimental to so many of the decisions that I make in life. I'm going to see this love that comes with no apologies, public correction in front of the whole church. I'm going to be shamed and I'm going to be guilt tripped. This church experience came with something different. This is the one that's going to make me sit in the front row when I didn't get it all right. This is the one that's going to call out my mistakes from the pulpit and also have sermons dance around the idea of something that we just discussed recently. Grooming doesn't always have to be sexual. Sometimes grooming can be spiritual, and that's what I experienced. The control. She had power over every single decision I made. And keep in mind, I met her when I was 14. All the way until 22, she was in my life, and I mean in my life. Controlled my life, so many aspects of my life, so many decisions that I made. It was always based on her approval, her opinion, and well, let's see what God has to say about it. But some odd reason, God always spoke to her very quickly and always left me hanging. So it came to a point where I felt like for me to hear from God, I had to hear from her. So she was always my 911. I didn't know relationship with God at this time. I only knew that she was the connection. So I'm going to see that her approval mattered. If I questioned her, I was rebellious. If I pulled away, I was backsliding. Her love was conditional on my obedience. And it came with no apologies, no sorries, because she always genuinely thought she was right. Question. Y'all know the name of this podcast, right? It's I Am My First Project. And I said that because this was a personal testament to myself. When I started it, I said, this is the podcast not only did I need, but this is also the podcast that you need. Do you see yourself in any of that? Do you see any moments where somebody else controlled an aspect of your life, where you feel like you don't have control? And it doesn't always have to be a church leader. Sometimes it could be a mentor. Sometimes it could be a friend. Sometimes it could be a partner. Sometimes it could be mom and dad. Are there areas of your life that you're not co-authoring, but yet you're the one that still has to live your story? It's just a moment of thought. And yes, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. So now we've talked about the control, but we also have to talk about the performance trap. Because when you're under manipulation and control of the church or a leader, you're going to catch yourself trying to overperform, overcompensate. And as much as I wish I could say that it was only in the church, it goes into my relationship. It goes into my friendships, and it goes into any encounter that I have with somebody. Is how can I perform to make them love me? How can I earn this acceptance? So perfect was the only option. I didn't know anything outside of that. I had to be perfect, to the point where sometimes to other people it translated like I thought I was perfect or I thought I was better than everybody. When in contrary to people's beliefs, it was actually not that at all. It was for me to be accepted or even be around you, I had to make sure that I was perfect to you or for you to even be welcomed here, to feel like I was good enough or worthy enough. And for some, that's something that you're probably still doing, something that's probably still uncomfortable. And I work with my clients every day to help them try and make sure that that's not their story anymore. Because at the end of the day, I keep telling you, you are your first project, but you have to want to work on your first project. So when will you be ready? I also saw that every time I sinned, I left the church because you can't be in the church and sin. That's what I thought. It was based on performance. I thought that God wouldn't love me anymore when I messed up. So now God is a conditional God and his love has to be earned. Religion controlled everything. My dating, how I viewed men, how I dated men. Everything had to be controlled by this performative state. Everything centered around marriage. And being good, being perfect was the ultimate goal. Kind of sucks when you're performing all the time. And for a very long time, I didn't even know who I was. I didn't know who Nesha truly was outside of performing. And that is why one of my biggest values is authenticity. When you are truly in your authenticity, you can truly live a life. You can truly co-author your story. You can truly take ownership of what's going on around you. But when you're not, you can't. You're not in control of anything because you're too busy being the victim. And I told you at the beginning, you have a choice with me because I meet you where you're at. But I only work with victors. I don't work with victims. You have to decide what you want to be. And in my story, I'm a victor. I went through it so that somebody else could see that it's possible to endure, to be resilient, and to be able to get through hard things, even when it seems like you don't always have the answer. So how this is going to end up shaping my relationships or my view of men. Men were either going to be godly or worldly. Dating was about finding your forever person. It wasn't something to enjoy. It wasn't something to learn about yourself. But how does that really work? How can you date to learn people if you're not really allowed to date for the enjoyment of it? I was already dating at a young age to just figure out who my husband was going to be, because that was the ultimate goal. Sex was shameful unless in marriage. That was already a big thing. And my pastor, first lady, would push so much that it was better to just get married than to have the sin of sex. It was just get married. Just get married. Everything else will be figured out later. That's not really something you should teach 15, 16, 17-year-olds. Just go get married. There's so much more to marriage than just sex. Marriage was the prize, and you have to get there at all costs. And last but not least is once you get married, you submit and you accept it. That's it. You endure it all. That's true for better or for worse, but when I mean you sit in that for worse sometimes. Because the one thing my first lady used to always say is she went through 15 years of hell in her marriage, and she was just so adamant that even though she was disobedient to God and she decided to marry somebody that God told her not to, she had no choice but to endure and go through it. And she would push that on us. This false notion that being disobedient to God and God telling her that she had to deal with everything that came with it had to be everybody else's story. So for her, love was hard. And she taught us that. She mentored that. And it's not that great of an experience. Okay. I'm going to get a little bit more comfortable because now we're going to talk about that marriage. This one's the one that hits a little different from me. Because nobody wants to get divorced. Nobody signs up for marriage with the idea of, I'm going to be divorced one day. And especially when you fight for it, you do the counseling, you do the pre-marriage stuff, you find help and look for mentors, but you just can't save it because at the end of the day, it takes two willing people who are willing and capable to want to make it work. And if one person's willing and the other person's not capable, it won't. So the 90-day marriage. Y'all, I met my ex-husband October 31st after I decided to come back to church to praise dance. They asked me to come and I was like, okay, cool, I'll come praise dance. I'd already left the church for something else. I think I had probably made like a sin or did something bad, so I had been out of church for a while. My first lady called me. She's like, you know what? I want to see you. And I was like, all right. So I praise danced and my ex-husband happened to be there. He was in the audience. I mentored to him or ministered to him in praise dance. And that was that. Little did I know that in his mind, I was going to be his wife. He said he already knew this months ago when he had seen me another time in church and that I was going to be his wife. And I don't know about y'all, but in the church, it is very common for you to hear, God told me you were going to be my wife. I didn't know this at that time. I was young, but I find this out very much later after 3 more wedding rings. So church is going to end up pushing this wedding to be really fast. They're going to push it, and it's going to literally happen from, I met him October 31st, and we are married January 23rd of the year coming up. And it happened fast. When I tried to slow down the pacing of the wedding, unfortunately, I was told that I didn't trust God, I didn't believe God, and God was doing this for me. And I was just being inconsiderate of everybody else. My decision of being married, my decision of being with somebody was a decision that was a part of my first lady's. And I didn't even realize at the time that she told me my first marriage was going to end in a divorce. She said this. And she was a prophetess. She was a prophetess in the church. So for her to even say that and me to sit with that years later kind of showed the totality of certain things that people say and words have weight, but also understanding that she wasn't truly covering me spiritually, nor was she covering me as a mentor. She was trying to check off a box to be able to say that she had another wedding that year because 3 or 4 other people had gotten married. We wanted to have the church wedding church. With that marriage, 1 week before we were supposed to get married, my ex-husband drops a bomb that his credit isn't correct, even though we have been in marriage counseling since pretty much November. So he was dishonest in marriage counseling. I decided to still get married. I probably would have reconsidered had I known that we were going to get married. I was going to pay for the wedding. I was going to pay for the apartment. And then I'm going to end up taking out a $7,000 loan to pay for all of his debt because his car gets repoed 2 weeks after we get married. And that's detrimental for somebody who's just got married. So you can only imagine, I'm on the bed sitting there looking at what the hell did I just get myself into? And I'm pissed and livid. But guess who I call? My wonderful, at the time, pastor and first lady. And their advice wasn't sound, and their advice wasn't wise, and their advice had no consideration to the fact that I said I had been lied to and bamboozled. Their advice was, we will figure it out. You're going to stay married. You're not getting a divorce. Because y'all, I was asking for an annulment. I didn't want it anymore. I wanted out. Because one thing about it is, I can work through a lot and I can accept for better or for worse. But I could not accept a liar. And the foundation of my relationship was based on lies, unfortunately. And finances was already number one reason for divorce. So that was already too much for me. So what did they say? Again, marriage was for better or for worse. I said my vows. I needed to be able to accept that he was sorry and accept the apology. No accountability for the behavior. No apologies. And that I needed to submit. I needed to pray harder, pray longer, and that we would reopen counseling. But how do you go to counseling when things aren't being told the truth? So the breaking point. I realized the church married me off to a complete stranger in 90 days. Hell, I realized I signed up to marry a complete stranger in 90 days. I realized they cared only about the institution of marriage and what they had going on in their church. It looked good on paper. I realized the first lady's love was control and not genuine love for me as a person. I realized I've been performing for opinions and relationships and people, and I cared so much about their opinion that I signed up for something that was going to be originally a lifelong commitment to another human. And finally, I left that church for good. After about year 1.5 of marriage, or a year and a half of marriage, the church just didn't end up working out for me anymore. It was time to depart. So some of the things that I want you to think about in this story. I told you that this love was manipulation. You know, you don't always see it. You don't always understand it. And sometimes it comes really, really sneaky. And that's how it came. I didn't know that it was going to be like this. I didn't know it was going to be contorted or perverse. I only knew that she cared about me, she listened to me, and she was different than any other adult I experienced at the time. But she was, in fact, taking advantage of me. She was, in fact, preying on the naiveness that I had and the amount that I actually worshiped her in a way. She took advantage of my spiritual journey, and instead of teaching me relationship with God, she taught me a religious aspect of making her my genuine connection to God. So if you can think of any time in your life where you've had a moment and you've been in church and leadership has seemed to take control of things and you feel like you don't have control, you might want to check the environment that you're in. You might want to understand that that's not God. You don't have to leave him. But you might want to reevaluate where you're going and where you're being led by. Because sometimes where people are leading you is to their own misery and they just want company. So the pattern of religion and how it controlled everything. What do I mean when I say religion controlled everything? I mean everything. My dating, who I dated, how I dated, when I dated, how I viewed men, godly versus ungodly, provider versus a project, my relationship with sex, shameful, forbidden, only accepted in marriage, being good and perfect, everything centered around marriage, and doing all the routine work. It controlled all of that. Church attendance, Bible study, prayer, service, performance, or perish. Sometimes I would show up exhausted, depleted, angry at God. Wasn't praying, wasn't praising, wasn't doing anything performative, but I'm here in the building. I'm checking off the box. And I bet you there's moments that you can think of right now where you're checking off the box. You're checking off the box with your kids. You're checking off the box with your marriage. You're checking off the box with your business. You're checking off the box with your friends. But you're not living. You're not thriving. You're not actually enjoying the relationship of what religion is or what that business is or any aspect of your life. You're just going through the motions, but you're suffocating. You're not living your story. And you want to know why you're not living your story? It's because you think it's selfish. And that's why I created Selfishly Growing, because I wanted to create a coaching program for women who have literally not experienced what it feels like to be their own first project, to be their own voice, to be the person that gets to dictate something and have control. Because for so many of us, somebody had control all the way up until now, that you don't even know what control looks like, tastes like, or feel like. And it would be something foreign to you. But what if I told you that you could be the co-author of your story? What if I told you that there was power in your voice? And what if I told you that your mess is a message for somebody else, and it's first going to be a message for yourself? My story and my testimony isn't just for y'all. When I'm sitting behind this camera, I'm literally in a session coaching myself through what I've been through. But I'm also so dang proud of how far I've come. What I learned from religion controlling everything was love was conditional. You have to earn it to be perfect. Your worth is tied to your obedience and your purity. If you weren't pure, if you had sex before marriage, if you weren't perfect, you were worthless. If you sin, God leaves you. The church is God and God is the church. If you struggle, you're weak in faith. Questioning is a rebellious act. You just don't do it. Leaving equals betrayal against God. And marriage is the goal. Get there at all costs. And how this is going to end up showing up in my life and bleeding out into other areas. Every time I end up making a mistake, I left the church. I was programmed to believe that if I wasn't perfect or if I did something wrong, God was no longer welcoming me into his space. That I could no longer breathe the same air, be in the same atmosphere as worshiping people or praising with God, because I was so disgusting. I had messed up so bad. I thought that God was mad at me every time I sinned and every time I left him. I felt like I couldn't separate God from people, and meaning like discerning who people were and if they were God sent, weren't God sent, if they were for me or against me. Performed perfection to earn love. Stayed in a toxic marriage for the sake of love and vows. People pleased from the ideology that that's what you do in religion. And let the church marry me off in 90 days because this was the will of God. So finally, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was exhausted. That is what actually is going to push me into some type of change, some type of transformation. I was tired of performing. I was tired of being afraid of God. I was tired of feeling like I had it all together or didn't have it all together. And I was tired of feeling like I had to earn everybody's love. And I was tired of not getting an apology for nothing. Nobody seemed to want to take accountability. That was just something I just couldn't handle anymore. And so I said I was done. Enough was enough. So we got tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired is what they say. Y'all probably been there before. If it wasn't in real life, maybe the gym. Just think of a time you were tired. And that's how I felt. Tired, exhausted, depleted, annoyed, frustrated, overwhelmed. You name it, I had the emotion. Had them all. Could wear them all. So what do we end up doing? We finally leave the church. This was a great day for me, y'all. It was because I end up finding my church home that I'm at now. I end up walking into this great new space, but the beautiful thing, it's not even called a church. It was called something completely different. And it was called Rehab City at the time. And that's going to be a breath of fresh air. But we're not going to talk about that church yet and how that played a role. We're just talking about the fact that I left and found something new, found a new encounter. So what happens when we leave the church? We divorce the church. We divorce religion. I divorced every ideology that came with that church. But even though I left, doesn't mean that I left whole. I left broken. I left scared. I left nervous. And I left pretty damaged. Kind of fitting that I ended up at a place called Rehab City, right? So when I left the church I was still married to my partner. This was now going to be a new transition because that partner is now going to not come to church as much. See, when you first meet this person, my ex-husband, is playing the role, playing the part, and performing in their own way. They were in the church, but not of the church, and say. They were in the church when it was comfortable to them and when they could play the drum and possess their own talents. But this church, they didn't get that accessibility. So they didn't want to go to church with me anymore. Well, the couples that pray together, stay together. This couple didn't have that fortitude anymore because now we start not being at church together. I'm going to feel guilty at first because now I feel like I'm walking away from God, but I knew that I just needed something different. And if I'm not at church, am I even a Christian is what I was thinking to myself. It was like, well, I left. We're not there. You've been there for the last 6 years. This church married you. This is what your family looked like, your friends. Everybody was of the church because they controlled so many aspects. So now what is this looking like? And then I'm going to struggle with hell, judgment, and being wrong. Did I make the right decision? Sometimes we question when it's time to leave. Sometimes we question when it's time to leave. But for me, it was just the enemy playing with my mind in a sense. I really didn't know too much about where I was going to go at the time, but I did know that I couldn't stay there anymore. It was too uncomfortable, and I knew that I needed to divorce that church because it was too much religion. So the deconstruction. So I had to start rethinking and revamping my mindset. We had to separate God from church. What was God and what was church? I had to redefine that for myself. I also had to redefine what relationship and religion looked like. Totally different than what I was taught. And I was in shambles. People don't realize that before you can learn something new, you have to get rid of the old. And so I was unlearning and relearning so much at the same time because I still wanted to be connected to God. I just didn't know what that looked like. And I was so full of shame and so full of guilt that I was still stuck in this. Well, God doesn't want to talk to me right now because I left church. And there has to be more than this because this can't be the same God that everybody else talks about. It's when I started telling myself, God is a good God, but God wasn't a good God to me. It was because I was struggling so hard with trying to grasp and understand where I was in life. I had to separate relationship from performance. I had to understand that relationships and performance didn't always go together. I didn't have to perform to be in a relationship. And that sometimes is hard for people. Sometimes people are working overtime in a 9-to-5 job just to be in a relationship that isn't really for them. It's not the weight that it's supposed to carry. Relationships are not supposed to be this job that consumes you of checking off boxes and performing all of these things. It's supposed to be something that you kind of breeze into, but you put in effort and get to enjoy. And then we get to some hard and difficult questions. What do I actually believe in? Or what was I told to believe? So then we get into some difficult questions. It's, what do I really believe in? Like, what do you believe in? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in this religion or that religion? And what was I taught and what's actually true? So this gets me into doing a deep dive and searching on what Christianity really looked like to me. What a relationship with God was actually meaning. What a relationship with God was actually going to be. And what it was supposed to mean to me. So with that being said if you realize relationship and religion are going to be completely different. And if you saw the title was a little controversy because God wasn't distant. It was the fact that what I was taught and my ideas of God was distant. I wasn't taught the same God that a lot of people were taught. I was taught a God that was based on my performance, my perfection, and what I needed to have figured out. But that's not the same God. Religion says, follow the rules, be obedient, or else. Relationship says, you're already approved. Religion says, marriage is the ultimate goal. Relationship says, wholeness is the goal. So what was the teaching moment of all of that? Well, I had to leave to find God. And for some people, that seems a little bit backwards. Don't you go to church to find God? That's not everybody's reality. For me, on the opposing side, God had a different plan for me. And I actually was able to find God in my own studies, my own relationship. And along the way, I do get some great leaders that are going to help me guide myself through that relationship. But my relationship with God was going to be cultivated in my privacy and intimate moments, in my weakest moments and in my broken moments. But it wasn't found in the church building. Actually, that relationship in the church building was ruled by manipulation, control, and religious antics. So today's whole episode was about when God is distant, but in reality, it was the opposite. It's when we're distant from God, but when I was raised as a child to be a little bit on the controversy in a not so great situation. So ladies, I work with a select number of women, and it's a very close group to me. I made a program called Mind Rescue, and it's 4 weeks of one group exercise that we get to work together and cultivate this atmosphere where we deconstruct all of these things. So if anything in this video was super relatable to you, of being abused by the church, manipulated, for any area of your life where religion controlled everything, I have a slot for you, but I only have 15 of them. And I would love to work with you. You do have to do an application. You do have to be selected. But if this was a relatable thing and you said, I've experienced some things that you have talked about and it was uncomfortable, but you know that there's more, this would be that. Now, let's go into a few questions. And before I leave y'all and say goodbye, I have to ask y'all some really deep and uncomfortable and reflective questions. Where do you see your relationship with God right now? How does your relationship with God affect your relationship with other people? And if you were to have to describe your relationship to somebody else about what it means to be in a relationship with God, what would that mean to you? I want you to think about those questions. I really want you to be self-aware, because God is never distant. He will never leave us nor forsake us. But thank you so much for watching I Am My First Project. This was episode 2, When God Feels Distance. Thank y'all so much. Bye.